Okay, I'm having some building work done at my house,
Yeah.
say an extension, or it could be a new build, whatever. As a
Okay.
layperson, how am I able to tell that the brickwork I'm having done is of any, is quality, is correct?
Right. Here comes the crash course. Ta-da! One brick. Okay. That face is called a stretcher. That part of the brick is called the stretcher face. That part of the brick, the end, is called the end face. Okay? That part, the bit that gets laid on, is called the bed. Okay. Now, bottom line is, you've seen it all over the country, but we were great at our brickwork once upon a time, and we used to have all different kinds of bonds. So you'd have something called English bond, for example. English bond is a load of bricks. If you imagine a wall, you're looking at the wall, a load of bricks laid like that, side by side to each other. So all these ends are facing on one course. Then on the next course, there would be all stretches. The next course, like that, next course stretches. Okay. We don't really use things like that anymore because we're now building cavity houses rather than solid wall houses. So which means we only ever need a wall, an external wall of about that thick. So what we're into now is what's more commonly known as stretcher bond, but its real name is half bond. So, where you've got in every house you look at these days, it's called half bond. So where you've got a brick and they're all laid end to end to end to end like that. And then the next course, they're laid halfway through.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Right, okay.
So the other
That
one,
is called
the
stretcher
first
bond.
one you spoke about, was that done for decorative purposes or what?
No, no, no. In the old days, before cavities, they used to do it to strengthen the wall.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? So the wall would be thicker. Okay. So this is why you used to have the brick going straight through two. If you imagine two courses of brick side by side.
Yeah, it'd make like a square,
Okay,
wouldn't it?
stay
Right.
there. Here's one I made earlier, right? So if you imagine a wall is two bricks side by side, okay? Then the next brick on the next course would come like that to tie them in. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So tie across the wall, and that's the face of your wall, okay? You don't do that anymore because now you have two skins like that, which are cavity, block work and the brickwork, okay? So your brickwork course now, your brickwork is laid in what we call half bond, like that, and so on, yeah?
Yeah. So if that was done to make the walls stronger, does that mean walls these days are weaker
No,
with the
no, not
cavity?
necessarily. What happens is arguably they could be weaker, but they're not. What happens in the old days when walls were built in solid fashion without a cavity, all the weight of all the floors and the roof was on that external wall. So you can imagine there's your external wall. So your roof joist would sit on there. Your floor joist would sit on there and come off. Your first floor joist would sit on there and come off. Your roof would come down like that and sit on there. So all the weight would be on this external wall. What happens is now, because you have a cavity, the same thing happens, but it only happens to the inner skin. So all your block work. Your outer skin, which is your brickwork, is more or less a facade these days.
Right.
Even though it's tied into the blockwork via tie irons, you've seen those metal ties that go across
When they lay them, they connect across the cavity like that.
They connect across the cavity.
Yeah.
But they're basically laid like that. So the blockwork walls take all the weight.
Right.
The external brick wall is more or less a facade these days. Obviously, it does more than that because it protects from weather, it insulates the house and all the rest of it. But in terms of structural, it's not really. And most people perceive the word structural being associated with weights and that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. Being able to take a certain amount of weight and strength, but it's not anymore. It's not very strong at all. All the weight is on the inside. All the strength, most of the strength these days is on the inside. Okay. So if you imagine, for example, if you have a window and you see a lintel on the window, and we call them a boot lintel, so they're usually shaped like that, come up like that, down and back again. The bulk of the beefiness of it is on the block work, isn't it? You know, if you see a house being built, you see this big sort of beefy black thing going through across the windows, don't you? When you see on the inside. Yeah. On the outside, it's just like a little tin lip that holds the brickwork.
Yeah.
Okay. So the bulk of it is on the inside because that's where the weight is. Okay. So going back to your brickwork. Okay. So making sure that you've got good brickwork. Now, you have joints in your brickwork. Okay. You have the joint that you see going lengthways, and that's called a bed joint. This is very simple. So I'm trying not to get too technical. I'm going to explain this so any layman could understand because it is so simple. So you've got your bed joint and you've got your what's called a perp. So it's short for perpendicular joints. Okay, they're called perps. Okay. Now, good brickwork, providing the bricks are always the same length, which 9 times out of 10 they are, but I'll go into that in a minute. Each joint, each perp should be the same thickness as the bed joint. So if you have a 10mm thick bed joint, then so should the perp be 10mm.
So you're talking about literally the gap between the bricks that the cement occupies?
Like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
It should be 10mm, okay? And the same there. 10mm under the brick.
Is that a building regs thing, or that's just like a...
No, that is quality craftsmanship. Now, quite often you get lots of different types of brick. Best way of putting this is families of bricks, okay? So you get an engineering brick, you get a wire cut, you get water struck, and you get stock, and you get handmade. Right. Now, your normal standard house bricks that you see a lot of are usually like a wire cut or a standard brick. And the wire cut and standard brick ones are usually nearly always the same length. So consequently, your brickwork will always look symmetrical. In other words, every one of these perpendiculars, these joints here, all the way up, the whole house and all the way down. So if you stood right up against your brickwork, against one perpendicular, it should line up all the way up.
Yeah.
You see them go jaggedy like that, they shouldn't. They should line up nicely all the way up. Now, this is where the craftsmanship comes in, because if you're using a stock brick, what's called a stock brick, or a handmade brick, for example, or sometimes a water cut brick, those bricks are they vary more in length, okay, and sometimes can in height as well, especially the handmade ones, because of course they're handmade and they don't go into the sort of standard conveyor belt process. They could be different. Now that is where the skill of the bricklayer comes in, because what a lot of them seem to do is they end up with wider perpendiculars, wider perps, okay, to accommodate the shorter length, and then their joints start veering off from each other like that, and it starts to look shoddy, okay. So the thing to look for is good straight flat beds and good straight perps, always on top of each other. If the bricks are different lengths, then the bricklayers have got to accommodate for this. It's usually best to work from the middle and mark your perps out, working outwards. Sometimes, depending on what apertures are in that wall, you can work from the outside in, marking your perps before you lay the bricks, so that you've always got your perps on top of each other. Okay, that is one thing to look for. If you're not getting that, then you really should be pulling up your bricklayers. The other thing is your brickwork should be clean. Shouldn't have cement. But too many bricklayers these days think they're getting cement all over their jeans, all over their clothes, and means they've done a great day's work and they must be fantastic bricklayers. They're not. The bricklayers to spot are the ones that are immaculate at the end of the day. The ones that turn up and their toolkit is clean and it's immaculate. Their van is clean. Because you know for a start, if their tools are clean, if their trowel is going to be clean, their levels are clean, they're clean, their van's clean, you know they're going to have a lot of pride in their work and their work's going to be clean. So that is a big tip. If they're clean, your work will be clean.
Yeah.
It's very important with brickwork that it is flat as well, so that your wall, if you touch, is flat. Too many are they do that sort of thing. They come in and out. Bricks are usually sitting as they're being laid, they twist them. They drop them below a line, because when you lay brickwork, you've probably seen it, a string line, and they always have to lay to the line. But what happens is, so that little arrow of the brick there, that little point of the brick there, okay, has to be dead in line with the line, okay, normally, with the string line, okay. Now, sometimes they lay them like that, and then they look terrible when you come to point them up. So you always want to pick things like that out. Make sure that all your bricks are, and if your bricklayers are trying to go too fast, slow them down. Say, slow down. I want this work done really nicely. I want it done accurately and beautifully. Now, sometimes if you're using old reclaimed bricks and stuff like that, then yeah, you want that rough and rugged look, but it's rare. Quality brickwork always looks best, no matter what brick you're using. If you're using handmades, wire cut, stocks, no matter what bricks you're using, quality brickwork always looks quality. So it should be laid properly. Shouldn't tip. Sometimes you have handmade bricks that have got curves in them. Okay, so they actually have a little curve in them. Well, the top of the curve is the bit that hits the line. The other bits drop below the line, yeah. But then the next one will do the same. But then it's all pointed up neatly and nicely. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So then, do you adjust? You adjust the bed for that as well, then?
No, the beds are always the same because.
So what at the highest part of the brick, you go 10 mil from the highest part to the next brick above.
That's right.
That bit's 10 mil.
That's how you work, right? But here's the thing you need to know: brickwork should always be laid. We call it laid to gauge. Okay. Now, let me tell you this: for every 3 courses of brick, okay, is 1 course of blockwork on the inside. Now, so when you're building up, by the time you've built 3 courses of brick, it should be 1 course of block, and they should be dead level. Next course of brick, next 3, next course of block, dead level. Okay. What you get a lot of the cases is that happening, bad craftsmanship. Shouldn't happen. Okay. So that's another thing to watch out for, to make sure that your brickwork is in line with your blockwork. Now, that's because I'm going back to what I said about gauge. Brickwork is always laid to gauge. Okay, now let me explain gauge. These days, most bricks are 65 millimeter in height. Okay, plus the 10 mil bed. Okay, yeah, the mortar bed they sit on is 75 millimeter. That is your gauge. So every course is 75 millimeter, 75 millimeter. And 1 course of block is 225 millimeters. So you can see 375s are the 225. Okay, so they should work in unison. But what you get a lot of the times is you get them laying high to the line or low to the line, or not measuring their gauge properly at the corners where they're supposed to be, where it starts off from for you to pull your lines in from. Do you see what I mean? Try to keep this simple. So they have to be 75 mil, 75 mil, 75 mil, 75, and you will have perfect brick lines going through all the time, no matter what bricks you're using, bent, warped, whatever. The worst thing that can happen is use a stock brick, say, that's a little bit bent and warped, okay? So all the bricks are a little bit bent and warped, and the gauge changes all the time. So sometimes they're an 80 mil gauge, then the other one there'll be a 60 mil gauge, and they're squeezing down, so you get tight bed joints, you get tall bed joints. Of course, the consequence of that is, if your perps are always going to be 10 millimeters, but your bed joints keep changing, you won't have that lovely matching perp to bed. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that can show you bad brickwork. Another thing to look out for is most of the time now they point them up by something called a bucket handle or a half round jointer. Okay. Now, quite often that you can buy now lots of different sizes of half round jointers. So if you went to your local tool shop, you will be able to buy different size joints. Now, what I always like to do is make sure that my half round jointer is wider than the bed joint. So I'm usually probably going to use a 20 mil but what a lot of bricklayers tend to try and do is they try and use like a 10 or a 12 mil half round. But all that does is digs into the joint. You don't want that. Every joint wants to be almost surface. So the curve of that joint, that bed joint, only wants to be quite shallow. Doesn't want to look like it's a big half moon digging into your brickwork. It wants to be quite shallow. That way, your perps and your beds will always look nice and flat or flattish, and all the same sort of thickness as you go through your jointing process. Okay, so that's something to look forward to look towards, making sure you get. There are so many aspects of construction, so much of brickwork. So much I'd like to go on about and tell you on what's good and what's bad brickwork, what's good and what's bad pointing. There's so many different types of pointing. We'd be here all day. But basically, you're looking for quality jointing, You're looking for quality gauging so that every course is 75 mil. You can check it yourself. Just run a tape up it. It goes in multiples: 75, 150 millimeter, 225 millimeter, 300 millimeter, and so on. Okay, or you can do it individually. Good bricklayers will use what's called a gauge rod. So they'll have like a thin line prop, and they'll put saw cuts up at every 75 mil. And every time they lay a new course of bricks at the corners where you start, they will put their gauge rod up and make sure they tap down to that saw cut, so everyone is accurate. What a lot of bricklayers do, it's the worst mistake they can make, is they lay a couple of courses, then when they come to lay their next course, they get their tape measure and they measure down 75 mil onto the next brick. Bad move, because if they're a millimetre out each time, the gauge will gain. They keep doing that every course, the gauge will gain. When they run their gauge, they should always put their tape measure right up to the first brick, the first course, and run the whole tape right the way up the wall. Make sure they're marking off if they can count. Marking off. So every gauge is the same, because doing it that way, you have the danger of being, instead of it being 75, it's 76 mil, but you haven't noticed because the wind's blowing, it's too cold, it's a little bit, and it's 76. Then the next time you're doing 75 again, you've gone 76 again, but it's actually 78.
Yeah, so and then the error just compounds all the way up
there.
Keeps
compounding, and that's when you end up with things going wrong.
Yeah.
So it's simple things like this to watch out for. So always run your tape down the corner and make sure, when the bricklayers have gone home, if you've not got the confidence to do it while they're there, run it down the corner, make sure that it is in increments of 75 millimetre, accurate increments of 75 millimetre. Make sure you then stand alongside the wall and the wall's nice and flat. Make sure that both, if you do one corner, checking that, you check the other corner as well. Otherwise, you end up brickwork going like that or like that, of course, don't you see? Which you don't want. And then that sort of thing doesn't show so much, just that little bit of tilt doesn't show so much in a straight wall. But the minute you've got a door or window in the way, it will show. Especially when you get to lintels and things like that, when you have a bigger joint, under the lintel on one side than you have the other. So it's just simple things like that. Simple, nice jointing, clean brickwork, clean bricklayers. You will always get a decent job.
Yeah. And what about, so you get these like trade bodies, don't you? Guild of whatever, guild of this, guild of that. If they belong to any of these kind of associations or trade bodies, does that count for anything these days? Does it mean, like, just by them having some kind of accreditation, does that mean that they're going to be quality bricklayers?
Well, it should do, but the way that, this is a difficult one, because the way the trades work these days, it's like, if I go to a job, if I go to build somebody's house, for example, and they say to me, can we have any references? We want to know about your work. I always say, yes, no problem. Always offer them references. But I know it's a waste of time, because we're full of subcontract labour these days. It's not like it used to be in the old days where people, men are on the books, they work for you all the time, no matter what job you went on. Everybody rushes for the pound now. Everybody rushes for the best money. So you might have had 6 months ago, you did a job, you might have had a gang of bricklayers on there, gang of carpenters, plasterers that were brilliant, but you can't because they're already booked. You can't have them for the next job, so you've got to use different bricklayers. So their work is probably not going to be. So it's down to my skill of management to make sure that I get more or less the same sort of quality of craftsmanship each time. But this is why, even with the guilds, these accreditation bodies, all the rest of it, they find it hard to police as well, simply because men are shifting throughout companies all the time. So, the simple way to look at it, if I was a bricklayer working for you and I worked for you for 10 years, you could more or less go to your client and guarantee this guy is who does our brickwork, he's brilliant, and they can feel comfort in that because they know. But, I don't know all the time who the next gang of bricklayers are going to be, because I don't know who's busy and who isn't, who's booked and who isn't. So sometimes giving out references is a bit of a pain, because you can't always, they're a nonsense, in other words. And the same with some of these accreditations. The accreditation bodies themselves are good, and they serve and set out to do good things, but they are sort of stifled in what they can offer because, they've given a company the accreditation to be in the Guild of Master Bricklayers or the Guild of Master Builders, whatever it is. But when they gave them that accreditation, they had certain men working for them. By the time they come to do your job, those guys are left and there's somebody else.
Yeah.
So, although it has to be said, lots of these accreditations go to the company. So, it's the company's responsibility to guarantee the work.
Yeah. But a better way of doing that than just thinking to actually just accredit, is that the right word? Individuals.
Yeah, you can do that, but not many individuals sign up to that. I mean, this game is still running word of mouth. It always makes me laugh. It's the same thing with apprenticeships. How do you know you've got a good quality, time-served carpenter bricklayer anymore? Nobody even asks for qualifications, indentures. It's all word of mouth.
Yeah.
It's all word of mouth.
Right. What? And is there still a massive shortage of bricklayers, like good bricklayers?
There's always been a massive shortage of good bricklayers. Quality men are very, very few and far between.
Yeah.
People are not taught. Men are not taught. Bricklayers are not taught. Carpenters are not taught in the way they were as craftsmen. Now they're taught just enough to enable them to get out onto a housing site and lay bricks in a line. Yeah. And believe you me, there are a lot of them and very few quality craftsmen. I would say this. If you want quality craftsmen, I know a lot of people out there would think, well, yes, you would say this, but I am telling you, you've heard it 1,000 times. You get what you pay for. Believe you me, if you want quality craftsmen, you've got to pay the money. There is nothing worse than going around to see a client. They're going to build this £500,000 house. They really want it done nice, but they want to scrimp on the labour. Because the minute they do that, their £500,000 house is not going to look the £500,000 house they expect it to be. Because they're not going to want to pay the money, and there lies the problem.
Yeah.
Most of the top bricklayers are getting the top money, but they are turning out the top work.
Yeah. All right, cool. That's it, I think.